My name is Riley Monroe. I am a 911 dispatcher in Tempe and a single mom to my 9-year-old son, Caleb. Tonight, we walked into a Scottsdale steakhouse for my parents' 45th anniversary. A private room, glowing like a stage. I was done pretending the script was fair. Sierra Monroe King slid a breadbasket toward Caleb and said we didn't order for him. My father, Gerald, chuckled that I should have packed something. My mother, Marianne, studied her water like it held answers. I smiled once and said, "Noted." I stood and met the waiter's eyes. "Please cancel anything that hasn't hit the kitchen. And put what already has on my father's tab since it is his anniversary. For my son, bring a ribeye medium rare, truffle freeze, and a Coke. And make it quick." The room thinned to a hush you could feel. Forks hovered. Brett King shifted in his chair. And Sierra blinked like a camera flash misfired. Caleb watched me. Steady and proud. The kind of quiet that says, "Understood." I set the restored wedding photo from 1,978 inches the center of the table and left it there to look back at them. No one reached for it. The jazz outside kept playing like nothing had shifted. But everything had both. Caleb's plate arrived first. For once, at the table learned who would be ignored tonight. No one spoke for a long moment. The air inside that private room was too still, too clean, like the calm that follows a siren. My father, Gerald, kept cutting his steak in slow, deliberate slices. My mother, Marianne, forced a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. At the far end of the table, Uncle Victor let out a single low chuckle, and Aunt Lena's gaze met mine. She didn't say a word, just nodded, like she'd been waiting years for me to stop swallowing my pride. Sierra's boys kept whining about their food. Unaware of the storm sitting between the adults, Brett shifted uncomfortably, staring at his drink as if it could make him disappear. The waiter returned with Caleb's plate. The scent of seared ribeye cutting through the silence. My son straightened his shoulders, proud and quiet, taking the first bite while the others watched. For once, he wasn't the one being told to wait. The gold light above our table made the breadbasket look almost tragic. No one dared mention the bill again. I kept my tone light, thanking the waiter as if nothing had happened. When Caleb asked for more fries, I smiled and nodded. Sometimes the loudest lesson comes from saying nothing at all. The next morning, I was folding laundry when a hard knock rattled my front door. Gerald stood there, holding a white envelope, Marianne behind him with her lips pressed thin, and Sierra wearing sunglasses, though the sky was gray. They didn't call first. They never did. Caleb was on the couch pretending to play his Switch, but his eyes flicked toward me. Gerald placed the envelope on the counter like it was evidence. Inside was the restaurant bill for $1,200 with a note scrawled in my mother's handwriting, "Pay your share." I leaned against the counter, calm, my voice low enough to keep control. I told them I hadn't agreed to pay half for a dinner that humiliated my son. Marianne's voice shook as she said, I'd embarrass the family in public. Sierra crossed her arms and called me delusional, insisting everyone thought I'd lost control. I laughed once, quiet and tired, and said maybe what they called crazy was just a mirror they didn't like. That sentence changed the air in the room. The door opened again. Uncle Victor and Aunt Lena stepped in. Steady and uninvited, but welcome. Victor asked if I was good. I nodded and reached for the envelope. I laid out receipts, payments, and transfers one by one. Proof that their version of family was built on forgetting. 2 days later, I came home from work to a voicemail that froze the air in my kitchen. It was from the Department of Child Services, saying they had received an anonymous report about Caleb and needed to schedule a home visit. I didn't need to guess who made the call. The timing spoke louder than any name. By the time the knock came, I had already scrubbed every counter and straightened every picture frame. Two women stood at the door, calm and professional, holding clipboards and soft voices. They walked through the house, taking quiet notes while Caleb showed them his room. His art was taped neatly on the wall, every drawing a piece of his calm. One of the investigators smiled before leaving. She said families often do this, that sometimes the call comes from inside the bloodline. Her tone was gentle, but the truth in it burned. I thanked her and closed the door, my hands steady on the knob. Caleb looked up at me from the hallway, eyes serious and older than his years. He asked if I was scared. I told him no. I was just done. That night, I tucked him in, turned off the light, and sat awake for hours, planning not revenge, but protection dressed as silence. The next morning, I called Dana Patel, a family law attorney recommended by Aunt Lena. Her voice was calm, efficient, the kind of calm that knows paperwork wins wars. She listened while I told her everything, from the dinner to the envelope to the DCS visit. When I finished, she said 3 words that felt like oxygen: cease and desist. By the end of the week, Dana had drafted a formal letter to Gerald, Marianne, and Sierra, ordering them to stop contact and harassment. Every claim was backed by receipts, messages, and the official report labeling the DCS complaint unfounded. It wasn't loud justice. It was justice written in clean black ink. She filed it and smiled, saying the silence after would be the sound of them realizing they'd gone too far. A few days later, their attorney responded with a threat to sue for grandparent visitation. The irony almost made me laugh. Dana reviewed Arizona statutes and said the case wouldn't hold. I didn't need to hope law had already taken my side. We submitted our response with proof of their pattern humiliation, financial manipulation, and false reporting. 3 days after filing, the claim was dismissed without a hearing. Caleb and I were free to breathe again. Dana said it simply: peace is paperwork with teeth. She was right. A week later, while cleaning the garage, I found an old box labeled Memories. Inside were yellowed letters, brittle from time and dust. One envelope caught my eye, my mother's handwriting, dated 35 years ago. The first line read, "I don't think I'll ever bond with this second child. I'm too tired to try." I sat on the cold floor, reading the words over and over until they blurred. It wasn't rage that filled me, just recognition. The distance I'd felt my whole life wasn't imagined. It had been documented. Every silent dinner, every uneven kindness had started long before I could name it. I folded the letter and slipped it into a file with my other records. It wasn't evidence for a case, just proof for my own sanity. For the first time, I didn't want revenge. I wanted understanding without illusion. Some truths don't demand confrontation. They simply demand acknowledgement. When Caleb called from the doorway asking if I was okay, I said I was fine. I meant it. One night, while updating my banking app, I noticed a familiar name buried in old transactions. It was Colin Monroe, my ex-husband. There were several Venmo notes between him and Sierra, dated months before our divorce was finalized. Phrases like, "Thanks for keeping quiet and photo session tomorrow." My chest went cold. Silence had always been the family currency. But this was a new exchange rate. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I printed every transfer and tucked them into the same folder that held my mother's letter. The pattern was too clear: money, secrecy, convenience. When I asked Brett a few days later if he knew about the transfers, his eyes flicked away too fast. He muttered something about a side project. The kind people never declare on taxes. Later that night, I looked up King Partners LLC and found it registered under Brett's name, showing sudden deposits around the same time Sierra had messaged Colin. It wasn't proof of betrayal, but it was a blueprint of corruption. They all used relationships like accounts, withdraw what they needed, call it family, and leave the overdraft to me. I didn't tell Dana yet. I wanted the timing to hurt the most when the truth surfaced. Instead, I waited, collecting screenshots and noting dates. The way dispatchers mark timestamps in emergencies. When a pattern becomes undeniable, you don't yell. You log it. Then you act. 2 weeks later, my parents invited everyone to a family reconciliation dinner. I agreed. Not for peace, but for clarity. The same steakhouse. Same room. Same polished silverware, only this time I brought an iPad instead of a gift. While they ordered wine, I mirrored the screen to the wall monitor and opened a single folder labeled Receipts. First came the DCS report, marked Unfounded. Gerald's face turned crimson as he read the official seal. Then the Venmo transfers between Sierra and Colin, followed by Brett's LLC deposits. The silence grew dense enough to feel physical. The kind that makes even the ice in your glass sound too loud. Marianne reached for her napkin like she could hide behind fabric. Sierra tried to laugh it off, calling it a creative project. But Brett's jaw tightened. When I asked who filed the anonymous report, no one answered. I didn't press. Instead, I let the evidence speak in the clean, chronological order of betrayal. Every timestamp was a confession they'd already signed. The waiter refilled glasses, careful not to look at us. Somewhere in the background, a saxophone played a song too elegant for the scene. Gerald finally spoke, asking what I wanted. I told him the truth, nothing. I wanted them to sit in the silence they'd earned. The check arrived again, but no one touched it. This time, I didn't say noted. I didn't need to. The morning after that dinner, I met with Dana again. We filed an official no-contact order listing every incident of harassment, false reporting, and financial manipulation. It was precise, unemotional, and signed by the court within days. The letter made one thing clear: any future interference would carry legal weight, not family guilt. Aunt Lena helped me update my healthcare proxy so that if anything happened, she and Uncle Victor would make medical decisions for Caleb. We drafted a new will, naming them as his legal guardians. Signing those papers felt like locking a door I had spent years trying to close. For the first time, my family's safety didn't depend on my parents' approval. Next came money. Dana sent a demand letter to Brett King, listing the total amount I had covered for Sierra's bills. If he failed to repay within 30 days, the file would go to the state tax board with his LLC transactions attached. 2 days later, the transfer arrived half the balance. No apology. Just a subject line that read, repayment. It was the cleanest conversation we'd ever had. Sierra's marriage began to crumble under the pressure. Gerald stopped taking calls when he realized his reputation could reach the courthouse record. Marianne withdrew into her church committees. And I went back to dispatch. Headset steady. Voice clear. Justice didn't roar this time. It processed quietly. One signed document at a time. A month later, Caleb and I drove north to Prescott. The air was thinner there. Cooler. Scented with pine and lake water. We pitched a small tent near the shore and built a fire that crackled like it had something to say. The quiet didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Caleb roasted marshmallows, his face lit gold by the flames. He said I seemed lighter, like something had finally let go. I told him that's what freedom feels like when it stops asking for permission. The stars above us were sharp and endless, untouched by everything we'd left behind. When the fire died down, we sat in the dark, listening to the lake breathe. I realized revenge had never been the ending. It was just the clearing that made peace possible. For the first time in years, I didn't need to win. I just needed the silence. Gerald stopped showing up at his usual diner after word spread about the DCS report. His old co-workers whispered about the family call, and the pride he'd carried like armor finally cracked. Marianne kept attending her church groups, trying to pray away the silence I'd left her in. Neither of them called again. I didn't block them. I just never picked up. Sierra's world unraveled quietly. Brett moved out first, transferring their joint account into his own name. Her online work dried up, followers fading when she stopped pretending her life was perfect. Sometimes I see her posts quotes about forgiveness written like bandages over guilt. I don't comment. She already knows I keep records. Brett's LLC was flagged for review. His brokerage license temporarily suspended. He tried to settle quietly, the way men like him always do. Dana handled it all without breaking a sweat. By the time it ended, his apology came through a payment confirmation. At home, Caleb and I built something smaller but cleaner. We locked the doors we needed to and left the others open to air. Justice didn't ruin anyone, it revealed them. Every lie had an invoice, every silence a receipt. And when the balance cleared, peace wasn't a gift, it was payment in full. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story spoke to you, please subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And if you carry a story of your own, I invite you to share it in the comments. Your voice matters here. Always.